Hello guys. So today again we are sitting down with Dr. Pratik Agrawal, the founder of Dozen Diamonds. He's been deep in the data game since 18 years, working as a data scientist, solving complex problem and building systems. Before all of this, he got his PhD in biomedical engineering and postdoc in psychology. And yeah, he's also an IIT Kharagpur alumni with a BTech degree in electronics engineering. Safe to say, he's been blending logic, numbers, and innovation for a while now. So let's get into it. So, Dr. Pratik, my first question is, what is the vision behind Dozen Diamonds?
So there are multiple dimensions to the vision of Dozen Diamonds, right? I mean, broadly speaking, the idea is how do you make the retail investor participate in the stock market, right? I mean, of course, one can say, why should there be even a force towards engaging the retail investor into the stock market, right? So if we take the model of an economy that flourishes in the presence of the stock market, we have to take examples of a developed country like US, and we usually find that in terms of the wealth, the distribution of wealth by sector, there usually 65% of their wealth is sitting in financial assets, and only 35% is sitting in hard assets like gold and real estate. While in India, the equation is exactly the reverse. In India, 35% of our wealth is sitting in financial assets and 65% is sitting in gold and real estate. Right? If you come down to the numbers of how those financial assets are allocated, we understand that the problem is even more severe. While countries like US invest 50% of their financial assets in the stock market, in India the number is down to 15%. So now you take 35%, take 15% of 35%, you are left with 5%, and if you take 50% of 65%, you are left with 32.5%. So now the gap is almost 6 times, right? So it's a huge gap in terms of the participation of the people in the stock market, right? So that's one dimension to the problem. The other dimension of the problem is that if we look at the GDP of the country and the market cap of the country, we find that that ratio is at almost twice in US, while in India it's probably 1.15 or 1.2, right? Of course, oftentimes an argument is made that 1.15 or 1.2 is probably the fair value. Any value higher than that indicates that the market is overvalued. However, it is also a higher value is not just a sign of an overvalued market. Oftentimes, it's a sign of the optimism in the market about what the future holds. As new technologies and new solutions like OpenAI have become more prominent in the most recent years, of course that is going to fuel the optimism in the market. So I personally don't look at it as an overvalued market. I look at it as a market where there is optimism about the future growth of the country. In India, that does not exist. And for example, this is not just a problem I am talking about. The Indian government has also tried to address this problem in different ways. For example, only 1% of the national wealth is sitting in gold when it comes to US, while that number balloons to 21% when it comes to India, right? So the natural question that the Indian government has been asking is that how do you move this dependence on gold as a wealth in India versus 1% in countries like US? Like, how do you make that shift happen? So they came out with different schemes. They came out with schemes focusing specifically on gold. Did not work. It could not shift needle, right? Then they came out with a scheme which talked about basically providing plans to people that help them systematically invest in the market. So there are SIP plans, there are investment plans, there are savings plans. Some failed, some succeeded to some extent, but the needle has not moved significantly, right? I mean, the participation is slowly increasing. We have probably gone from a 3% participation with the 3% of the population participating to probably about 7% of the population participating. But we need a participation by at least 30 to 40% of population, because the net worth of 30 to 40% of the population is above 5 lakhs. Anybody with a net worth greater than 5 lakhs, if you compare the numbers, should be able to invest at least 2 lakhs in the market. That does not exist, right? So the question becomes, what is the real issue? Why are they not participating in the market? And I think very correctly in 2023, I think the Supreme Court identified that they are apprehensive about the volatility in the market, right? They are apprehensive about the fact that eventually stocks are profitable. That everybody agrees on. But the intermittent losses that the market goes through is something that worries them, that makes them question whether they should take the bet or not, right? For example, the general belief is that the stock market gives you about 2% more returns than gold, right? But the volatility is so high that a normal Indian does not feel comfortable about that, right?
Exactly.
But that hesitation ends up affecting not just the wealth building by the individual, but it also limits the growth of the country, right? So it's a vicious cycle we find ourselves in as a country, that in the search for safety, we are not propelling our own growth, right? So for example, in 2023, when the Supreme Court wrote a letter to SEBI asking them, what is SEBI doing to protect the retail investor from the volatility in the market? Dozen Diamonds had also written a letter to SEBI saying that we have a program, we have a plan that will convince the customer that there is no need to worry about the ups and downs of the market, because there can be a regular cash flow that they can accumulate using the volatility in the market, and which can establish their confidence in the market. So that is the vision of the Dozen Diamonds, that we believe that these problems that the country is facing can probably be addressed by convincing the retail customer that there is a way to manage the risk in his portfolio by properly trading, and by assuring him that there is a consistent return he can get from the market if he follows the right trading principles.
Okay.
That is the vision of Dozen Diamonds.
Right. Good. So, what do you say? Which part of stock market will be impacted by Dozen Diamonds?
Of course, there are multiple players in the stock market. The stock market is just not an exchange where trades happen. There are brokers involved that are participating in the exercise. There are regulators involved. Even the media is involved. Even the media participates in that exercise, right? One of the parts of that vicious cycle I was talking about is that most of the participants in this market have come to believe that the reason the retail trader is participating in the market is because he is looking to maximize his portfolio's profit, and he is willing to take the risk. That is the general belief, right? That is a belief that we don't even question anymore, right? We have gotten to a point where I have talked to a lot of brokers and they say, well, he wants to gamble, let us provide him the tools to gamble. There is no more a question of recognizing that trading is a mechanism for him to control the risk in his portfolio, and we need to give him the right tools that can help him engage in that proper fashion. One of the characteristics of the stock market is that it becomes whatever you want it to be. You treat it like a casino, it will behave like a casino. You treat it like an asset, it will behave like an asset. You treat it like a business, it will behave like a business, right?
Right.
So it is just that the different participants in the market have come to an agreement that the trader is misbehaving and we need to fuel our side of the business at the expense of his misbehavior, right? Whether it is the broker, whether it is the media, they are all providing him mechanisms where they say, buy this stock at this price, put a stop loss, and this is your exit, right? We are still a market which is, the Indian stock market is still a market that is driven by the brokerage fees. The brokers are participating based on the brokerage fees. Some of this brokerage fees is ending up in the hands of the media, and the media becomes a silent partner to the brokers, right? So that whole mechanism is fueling this gambling habit of the retail trader. I believe that if a company like Dozen Diamonds provides the tools, the right tools, of course, I mean the third player in this whole game is the algo trading platforms. They are adding their own complexity and they are also basically catering to the brokers. Because the brokers approach them and say, the more trading tools you provide, the more the customer will trade, and that's what we want to achieve. A lot of brokers approach me with that idea also, and I tell them specifically, I'm not in the business of selling newses, right? I'm not selling a tool to my customer that will hang them, which provides them a mechanism to hang themselves. I'm not in that business. I don't want to be in that business. As the name says, we are in the business of selling a necklace, right? We are selling a necklace made of diamonds. When we talk about 12 diamonds, we basically mean 12 stocks. And we want to convince the customer that following the Dozen Diamond strategy, the customer is definitely going to benefit because he has a much better control over his cash management. The other thing that happens because of the plans that Dozen Diamonds offers is that the customer will actively trade no matter whether the market is high or low. So now the broker that is basically involved in facilitating the trades is also not going to get impacted by the ups and downs in the market, because as long as the customer is trading actively, the broker is satisfied. His needs are satisfied, right?
Right.
Of course, usually what happens is when the market is going high, the broker tries to fuel the customer into over trading, and then when the market comes down, then he finds himself helpless. But by following a Dozen Diamonds approach, basically he can have a steady growth of income rather than relying on the behavior of the customer, right? Because the behavior of the customer becomes independent of the direction of the market. So the broker will benefit. Of course, the hope is that at some point, the way the media provides information to the customer will also get influenced, and it will be more focused much more on engaging him towards defining the stocks he really loves and believes in, and will be ready to hold whether the market goes up or down, right?
Okay.
So in a way, every participant in this market will be able to participate with a win-win approach rather than trying to make wins at the expense of others' losses.
So I guess you have more than one product in Dozen Diamonds. So what is the main product, immediate product on which Dozen Diamond focused on?
So the three immediate products that we are focused on, right? Our first product is Coach, that's the mobile app. That is the one that is most apparent when it comes to Dozen Diamonds website, and when we present ourselves on LinkedIn or even in our webinars. The part of the Dozen Diamonds product line that gets talked about the most is the Coach app, the mobile app. And the focus on that app is to facilitate the stressless trading method to the retail customer, right?
Okay.
That is the most apparent product. The second product, which we call Kunji, is basically an analysis tool, because this strategy is very different from any other strategy. it requires a different kind of analytics framework that needs to be pursued by the retail investor to understand what impact the market as well as the strategy is having on his portfolio. So the analytics set of tools that we have, that we call analytics, for us, we have given it the nomenclature Kunji. The third product that Dozen Diamonds is focused on is basically for the brokers. It's almost like a broker dashboard. So if a broker is having 20, 30, 50, 100 clients, then he can understand how the performance of his client's portfolio is progressing using the broker dashboard that we call Khazana, right? So the idea behind Khazana is basically now he's basically being able to monitor multiple portfolios and either give advice or figure out the direction these portfolios are taking by looking at these portfolios as a collective, right? So these are the three main products that we are currently focusing on.
Yeah, the names are interesting. Can you tell me how did you come up with these names, Kunji, Khazana, and Kos? These are interesting.
Yeah, I mean the idea should be pretty obvious. Kos basically implies a treasure chest, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you are going to create dozen diamonds, you better be creating a mechanism to hold your dozen diamonds, and that is the Kos. That is the treasure chest that we are helping the retail investor build.
Okay.
For him to get understanding of how his portfolio is behaving, we have Kunji. By definition in Hindi, Kunji implies analysis and understanding and a better a mechanism to understand. Almost like a key to the portfolio or the key to the treasure chest, right? So it helps you understand how to build your treasure chest, like what changes do you need to make to your treasure chest.
Makes sense. Okay.
Khazana, by definition, is a collection of treasure chest, right? I mean, Khazana is like, okay, you found a hidden treasure somewhere where there are multiple treasure chests being kept, and that's why we came up with the idea of the name Khazana.
So, what are the medium-term product in Dozen Diamonds?
So right now, the way we are marketing the company, it appears like there's only one strategy that is part of Kos, right? And primarily we have kept it to one strategy is because that strategy captures the underlying theme of Dozen Diamonds, right? But there are many variations possible in that theme depending upon certain preferences different customers might have. Of course, there are some boundary conditions that have been set in that strategy, and those boundary conditions will be respected in all future strategies. For example, the customer should never run out of cash, the customer should never have to predict the direction of the market, the customer should never have to follow the news, the customer can rely on his belief in a company for making his investments. Those underlying principles will be followed. But in the midterm, by which I mean 9 to 18 months down the line, we will be coming up with new strategies that meet the same boundary conditions but cater to specific needs of the customers even within that framework. For example, we are trying strategies that are focused on determining how the cash is allocated on the upside versus the downside, depending upon whether the customer wants to increase the number of shares that he has in account or whether he wants to increase the amount of cash that he's generating. Not everybody is interested in extra cash. Some people might just say, I wish to translate this extra cash to owning more stocks, right? So there are many variations possible. There's at least 6-7 variations that Dozen Diamonds is recognized. And these will be made part of the Dozen Diamonds app as a new set of strategy which meet the basic boundary conditions. So that is, you can consider those as the medium term products.
Okay, and so and looking a bit ahead, what's in the pipeline for the next 6 to 12 months any long-term product or products you are excited to build later?
Those are the strategies. We will be busy building more strategies so that we can engage the customers and cater to specific needs of the customers.
Okay. And what about the long-term product? Do you have some long-term products for customers?
We have similar plans. We also plan to provide a product that is focused on credit scores and which will enable loans being dispersed to small businesses as well as individuals. But the underlying theme remains the same. Making the financial life of an individual retail customer stressless remains the goal. Whether it's credit scores or whether it's loans or whether it's banking, whatever products we come up with. For example, we have our own notion of aspects that are the strength of a retail investor that never get accounting for in his credit scores. Those need to be pulled in. Instead of treating a retail investor as a corporation, one needs to recognize that he is an individual and there is some complexity to his behavior that needs to be captured in his credit score.
Okay.
Right? So all these different aspects will be taken care of in our future products.
Okay. Perfect.
Again, the goal being to reduce the stress and improve the financial life of an individual retail customer.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Prateek.